Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial we'll explore HTML files, how Python interacts with HTML files, and everything you need to know about them as a beginner Python web developer. The things we will talk about will come in very handy if you're working on any Flask apps, if you're working in Django, if you're doing any web scraping with Beautiful Soup, or if you're just interacting with HTML code or HTML files in general. So what is HTML and what is something that you see on the screen right now? So HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is the standard language used to create and design documents on the World Wide Web. HTML documents are the building blocks of a website which define its structure and content. The HTML file that you see on the screen right now is basically an index.html for a very simple Flask app that basically just has a header that says welcome to my Flask app, and then just a paragraph that says that this is a simple Flask app. Now, if we render this file, meaning that if you save it on your computer, if you create a file like this and you're going to open it with your browser, you will see exactly just the header and the paragraph. Now, I'm using VS Code, and in VS Code, there is a really handy plugin that basically allows us to render HTML files and see how they look like without leaving the VS Code environment. The plugin is absolutely free, you can install it. So now let's do a small preview of the file to see how it looks like. And again, so this is something that you will see if you were to open this exact file in the browser, just the header and the content with the text. So why do we use HTML? In web development, HTML serves as the foundation upon which websites are built, and understanding HTML is essential for Python developers who are working on any web development projects as well as web scraping. Also, it is useful when you're trying to do some automated testing and some other stuff, because many Python frameworks and libraries interact directly with HTML content. So how does HTML actually work in Python? Python is its own language and it doesn't natively understand HTML code and HTML files. However, it can interact with HTML files through different Python libraries and frameworks. So for example, libraries like Beautiful Soup and LXML can help you parse HTML files, which allows Python to understand the file structure and content. This enables Python developers to programmatically interact with HTML files and perform tasks like web scraping, automated testing of web applications, and even creating and manipulating HTML files directly. So as I mentioned earlier, Python's web frameworks such as Flask and Django use HTML templates to dynamically generate web pages. Now, to continue in this tutorial, we will do a little environment setup, and we will need a few libraries, which are Beautiful Soup, Requests, and LXML. If you already have these libraries installed, then you're good to continue further in the tutorial. If not, since there is several libraries, we're just going to create a simple requirements.txt file and install all of the libraries from this file using some code in the terminal, so we don't have to install them one by one. Since these libraries are already installed on my PC, the code just ran in a few seconds, but if you don't have them installed, it will take a little bit of time, so just let the code run and get the libraries installed. In this section, we will cover the fundamental concepts of HTML and how to structure HTML files and the common HTML tags and their uses. So let's begin by talking about the structure of the HTML file. The HTML file you see on the screen right now is going to be a sample file we will work with. If you're looking for the code for it, it will be available if you follow the link to my tutorial on my website, where all the code snippets and all the explanations are available as well. So what do we see on the screen here? We see the HTML file, and it starts with the very first row, which is doc type. Doc type appears at the beginning of HTML file and tells the browser which version of HTML is used in this file. And since our file is written in HTML5, we see doc type HTML. In the second row, we see the HTML tag, and it appears at the beginning of the file before you write any code, and also at the end of the file, which is going to be the /HTML when you finish writing the code. It wraps all the content except for doc type. Now, right after the HTML tag, there's a head tag. It represents the section that includes all the meta information about the HTML file, including title, character encoding, style, and a lot of other things. So here, for simplicity, we've just included only the title using the title tag. And basically inside of the title tag, we put some text and we just say, hey, this is a title. Now, after the head tag, we see the body tag. It is the section that includes all the content of the HTML file that will appear on the web page, including text, lists, images, links, and a lot of other information. So when we render it in the browser, this file will have the following content. Right, as we can see, it just says this is a heading and this is a paragraph. This is exactly the content that is written inside of the body tag. So this gives you a basic overview of how HTML files are structured. In reality, HTML files of websites are much more complex. So this is just a very beginner-friendly view on what it's like, how it's structured, how the things are operating, what's the order of the tags, and things like that. In the next section, we'll talk specifically about different HTML tags and their uses. We will start by talking about the heading tag. So heading tags are used to define headings of different levels on the web page, where H1 or heading 1, where heading 1 denotes the most important heading, while H6 denotes the least important. So when do we use them? We use heading tags for structuring your content hierarchically, and it is good for SEO and accessibility as it outlines the content, making it easier for search engines and screen readers to navigate the page. In reality, what this looks like is whenever you're reading any article or any tutorial, even on my website, you will see that the beginning of the section will have a tag, or it'll be a heading, which basically denotes the beginning of an important part of the document. And you will see that the text is larger compared to the text in the content section. So basically here on the screen, I added sample tags from H1 to H6. So usually H1 will be a title of your article, H2 will be like the main sections, and all the way from H3 to H6 will be different levels of subsections. So now let's see how this file looks when we render it. And as you can see, the level 1 heading is the largest one, and the size decreases all the way down to level 6 heading, which is the smallest one. The next tag we're going to talk about is the anchor tag. So the anchor tag is used to create hyperlinks to other web pages or locations within the same page. In this example, I created 2 links. The first link is going to be to visit my site, and the second link is going to be also to visit my site, but it will open in a new window. So if you're going to render it in a browser like Google Chrome and you're going to click on the first link, it will take you directly to my website within that tab. But if you're going to click the second link, my website will open in a new tab. So when do we use them? Anchor tags are often used with the href attribute, which holds the URL of the link. And obviously, as I mentioned before, it can be used with other attributes like target to open the link in a new tab, and there are a few other functionalities. Now let's see how this file looks like when we render it. And as you can see, there is the first link that takes you to my website, and then the second one that takes you to my website but opens it in a new tab. Since I'm using VS Code right now, if I'm going to click on either one of them, it's going to open in Google Chrome in a new tab. But if you render it in the browser, the first link will take you to my website within the same tab, and the second link will take you to my website in a new tab. The next tag we're going to talk about is the image tag. So the image tag is used to embed images into an HTML document. When do we use it? Image tags are used to display images or alternative text. Image tags are often used with the src attribute, which holds the path to the image file, and alt attribute, which provides alternative text for the image if it can't be displayed. Now in this HTML file for src, or for source for the image, I just wrote image.jpg. And since we don't have any image in this directory, the image won't be displayed. And if the image is not displayed, then the alternative text will be displayed, which will basically say description of image. Now let's render this file and see what it looks like. Now, as you can see, no image is displayed, but the alternative text is displayed and it says description of image. Now I also have some warning that says some content has been disabled in this document. Again, this has nothing to do with the HTML text. I think this has to do with a few things in the plugin configuration, which you can adjust. Now we'll talk about list tags, and list tags are used to create lists of items. So there's three different kinds of them. The first one is UL, and it's used for unordered lists. The second one is OL, and it's used for ordered lists. And the third one is LI, which is basically a tag that must be used for each item in the list. So here first we create an unordered list, which has three items, which is item A, item B, and item C. Then I also use a line break tag between the two lists because I simply want to input an empty row so we can separate two lists from each other. And then we have an unordered list, which also has three items, which are item A, item B, and item C. Basically, the structure is that you will need to use either UL or OL to start either an unordered list or an ordered list, and then for each item in the list that you want to add, you will have to enclose it in the LI tag. So now let's take a look how this file looks like when it's rendered. And as you can see, there's two lists. The first list is unordered, and the second list is ordered, and between the two lists there is an empty line. So these examples cover some of the most fundamental and widely used HTML tags, combined with the basis for creating structured HTML files. When combined with a basis for creating structured HTML files, you can create informative and navigatable web documents. As you become more comfortable with these tags, you'll be able to create more complex and styled web content, as well as understand and analyze HTML content much quicker for web scraping. Now we're going to talk about how to read HTML files using Python. In this section, we'll explore how to use Python to interact with HTML files, focusing on reading HTML content using Python libraries. Generally, you will have two cases when reading HTML content. You will either read HTML file from a URL, or you will read HTML from a file. First, we'll talk about how to read HTML from a URL. So let's use an example URL for which we would like to read the HTML content, and for this tutorial we will use example.com. To run the code in this section, we will need requests and Beautiful Soup libraries, and with them we can easily access, read, parse, and print out the HTML content from a URL. So let's start by importing the required libraries. Next, we will fetch the HTML content from a web page. Here we're using get function from the requests module, and inside of it we're passing the URL of the web page that we would like to access the HTML content from, and we store it in an object called response. This will basically fetch the HTML content from a web page. Next, we're going to use Beautiful Soup to parse the HTML content. So we're creating a Beautiful Soup object and passing two arguments into it. The first one is response.content, which is the HTML content of the web page. And the second one is html.parser, which is basically telling Beautiful Soup that we're going to use HTML parser to parse the HTML content. And finally, we will print out the formatted HTML content using the prettify method of the Beautiful Soup object. Now, in some cases, when we try to run this code, you might get errors saying that multiple retries have been reached, which is coming from the requests module. So not always it works with every single link. And sometimes for the websites, there might be restrictions. So in this case, I ran this code before and I stored the output in example.html. So let's take a look at it. Basically, this just gives us the entire HTML file of that web page. And if you go through it, you will see some of the common tags that we've seen before, such as HTML, head, title, there's some body, then there's a lot of styling. And then the body tag opens. Inside of the body tag, there is an H1 tag, which has the level 1 heading that says example domain. And then there's a paragraph with some content, as well as a paragraph with another link. And then all of these tags are closing towards the end, with the last tag closing being the /HTML, which is basically placed at the end of the HTML content. For the second case, we will read HTML from file. So now we'll need a sample HTML file with some code that we're going to use, and it should be placed in the same directory as your Python file with the code. In our case, I'm going to reuse the sample HTML file that I used before to explain the list tags. So we call it sample HTML, and it is in the same directory as our file with the Python code. With the HTML file ready, we can now use Python to read the HTML content from file. We'll start by importing the Beautiful Soup library. Next, we will open the HTML file. We open the file in read mode, so now we can fetch the HTML content from file. Here we're simply using the read method, which is going to read the entire content of the HTML file that we've just opened. And similarly to the previous example, we are going to parse the HTML content using Beautiful Soup. Finally, once the content is parsed, we're going to print out the formatted HTML content. So let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, this is exactly the same content as I have in the sample HTML file. It's just formatted a little bit different, but the content is identical. In this tutorial, we explored a wide range of topics required to understand and utilize HTML in the context of Python development. We started by introducing HTML and its significance in web development, followed by setting up the environment necessary for HTML and Python integration. Then we delved into basics of HTML, discussing its structure, common tags, and best practices. And later we explored how Python can interact with HTML, focusing on libraries like Beautiful Soup and LXML for parsing, manipulating, and generating HTML content. So this should give you a very basic foundation of what HTML is, what working with HTML is, and potentially if this is something of interest to you, to encourage you to explore more content, more tutorials, and take more courses that are specifically focused on HTML or web scraping or Flask web framework. Feel free to leave comments below if you have any questions. Please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more of my Python programming tutorials.